Welcome to Lore Citizen, a podcast dedicated to all things Star Citizen lore. If you enjoy this, make sure that you like, subscribe, and follow all of our social medias. Without further ado, let's get started. Welcome to Lore Citizen. I haven't had to do one of these before, but I felt that it was very important to, given the nature of the content that's going to be discussed. So, content warnings for child abuse, child violence, child murder, and just violence in general for this episode. So just letting you know ahead of time, that's coming up. Thank you. Hope you enjoy the episode. I'm with two brand new guests who, if you've been watching my Captain's Table series, you've seen them on multiple times before, and they'll be on later on. Fun story, these two actually originally contacted me to be on Lore Citizen, and I thought they were talking about Captain's Table, so this is just like, this was the original show that they wanted to do. In fact, they contacted me specifically and asked if they could do this part. So I was like, yeah, sure. I'm always good with people who are interested in lore, who want to talk about stuff. So I'll introduce, I guess, in order of the, no particular order except for order of, I guess, presentation. I'm here with Fist and Jawa. So Jawa, who are you? What do you do in Star Citizen, and where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm Jawa Sparky. Let's see, and I've been doing Star Citizen almost a year now, and I like doing a lot of mining, and that's where my main thing is. That's where I'm really into that, and then I go do shenanigans with Fist, and you can find me on Thursdays on Twitch, 7 p.m. Mountain Time, and also Sunday mornings, 9 p.m. Mountain Time on Twitch as well.
Twitch.tv/
Fist and Jawa.
All one word?
All one word.
Okay. The link will be down in the description for those of you who are watching this on YouTube and for those of you who are listening to this on the podcast format. So, and of course, with Jawa, we have Fist. Fist, who are you? What do you do in Star Citizen, and where can they find you?
Hey, so I am Fist25, and I also do a lot of streaming with my buddy Jawa over there, and it is Fist Space and Space Jawa.
Yes.
We actually thought about swapping it around because people have different meanings, but anyway.
Fisting Jawa.
Yeah.
Yes.
That sounds like a very, very specific type of Star Wars fan community that no one wants to hear about.
Exactly. So anyway, we do we kind of do a little bit. We save the universe every time we stream, and we've been having a lot of fun with 314 kinda.
Minus the bugs.
Minus the bugs and the ballistics, but we won't get into that.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can find us again, as Java said, on our stream. I actually do the YouTube part of the stream on Thursdays, and it's YouTube. If you just search Fist and Jawa, or the link in our website, fistingjawa.org. We have a website where it has all the links to our Discord and everything. And then we just started a non-Star Citizen stream, and it is Dungeons and Dragons. We are called the Natural Ones, like the number one. So if those D&D nerds out there, if you roll a natural one, that's bad. And you can find us every other Monday on YouTube. Just search the Natural Ones. There's a big white natural one on there, and we won't be on we're not on today, but we will be on the following Monday on the 16th, and then every 2 weeks after that, and then we'll do some other content and stuff at that channel. So check us out over there. We're running a first edition module called Teagle Manor, but with 5th edition rules, and our DM is hilarious. So
nice. For those I would say Astropub superfans will know that I actually also run a weekly tabletop RPG podcast. So
right on.
That's on a completely separate channel from Astropub that very few people, only the hardest of the hardcore nerds follow me there.
Yeah, I may have to hit you up for that link.
Yeah, it's the Spice Must Roll is what it's called. Because it's all
nice.
It's all sci-fi based TTRPGs. So.
Cool.
But I grew up with, as many of us nerds did, grew up with D&D. But I just got tired of fantasy. I just wanted something more futuristic, and I've been experimenting with other things. It's pretty cool though. All right. Well, without further ado, let me talk a little, introduce the topic we're going to talk about with Star Citizen lore today. So for many people, this may be your first time. So like listening to anything lore. So I will try to be as bare basic as possible before each of our guests introduces their own section of this. But in the end of the 29th century, into the 28th century, humanity in the Star Citizen universe came a violent end to the ruling class that had ruled humanity for 200 plus years, the Mezzer family. And the process upon which the Mezzers fell is, like many political activities today, a complicated one that stretched over long periods of time. So we're going to talk about the end of the Mezzer era, and we're going to be looking at some specific events which, in the lore, they've marked as very important towards that goal. So we're going to start off with the death of Anthony Tanaka as talked by Jawa. So Jawa, tell us a little bit more about who Anthony Tanaka is and how does he get involved in this whole thing?
Yeah, those of you that have been playing for Star Citizen for a little bit and have gone to Levski, you see a guy in the main section of it. There's a gentleman holding a child. And then it says, Anthony Tanaka down at the bottom. And, I didn't know anything. I thought the guy was Anthony Tanaka, but no, the child was. As soon as I heard that, being a special ed teacher, I dove right into it. So just kind of a little background before we get to Anthony himself. As Paul mentioned, this group had been running for a couple hundred years. And over those years, it was a family that took over after each other or killed each other off. Go figure. That they were tightening their grip and stripping the Senate of their power and authority. They were corrupting the advocacy and into their private police force. And they used the fear of the Zion and Vandul mainly to feed all of this. So all of that was going on. And there was a young boy by the name of Anthony Tanaka. He didn't really know any of the history of what was going on. All he knew was what was going on around him. All he knew was a world of checkpoints and government brutality. But that was life. He was born into it, and that's what it was. His parents worked at factories, and they worked under the fear of persecution or anything. If you say anything wrong, they'll come down on you. You just kind of disappear, and they just followed their orders without question. At the age of 7 years old, Anthony was called to work at an herbal plant and to clean out scrubbing units. His size allowed him to get places where adults couldn't, and he could do a far more effective job. 4 years he worked. He worked there. He lived in the company barrack along with 50 other kids, and I can't imagine that was, just a wide, spacious place. It was probably pretty tight. He worked 6 days a week, and then on the last day, on Sunday, on his 7th day, he was spent in mandatory learning programs. So he had to go to school. At that time, they were forcing people to work like 7 days a week. And he had to do those learning programs, learning about human history. His wages were virtually non-existent because they're absorbed by housing, educational, and food charges levied by the company. Now, wait a minute. Who does that sound like? Could it be Hurston? You know,
Very comparable to Modern Hurston and ArcCorp, actually, which is
yeah,
very interesting.
I
Yeah.
think our corp's not as bad as Hurston, but
Yeah. They don't have the lifetime slave labor, but yeah.
right. So, to make things worse, in 2757, a gentleman by the name of Lane Corpus, he was actually the Imperator's distant cousin, was appointed to administer the Magnus system. After a noticeable declining in product quality. This guy, he was not a good guy. He was really vicious. And the Imperator at that time felt that he could entice them back to work. And his first order was to cancel the learning program and force the underage kids to work all week. As you can imagine, working 7 days a week, you know, it's conditions just in the factory slowly diminished. And things just got tougher. Shifts were extended by 2, then 4, then 6 hours. Available food, they just skimmed it just to cut costs as best they can. Um, and just so that the kids would have just enough energy to work without collapsing. And it was just really tough. And then on December 3rd, 2757, now that's an important date. On the tail end of a 16-hour shift, Anthony Tanaka's foreman ordered him to pick up a shift for a coworker who went into anaphylactic shock after being exposed to a ruptured chemical canister. Anthony refused. I mean, how many days in a row had the poor kid been working? I mean, he's 11 years old. And 11 or 12 years old. And he was just exhausted and he didn't want to do it. And his supervisor saying, "No, you got to do it." And the boy refused. The foreman tried to, tell him to silence, and Anthony kept getting louder and louder. No, I don't want to do it. I could see him, tears running down his face, just so exhausted. He just wanted to go put his head down just for a couple hours. So unfortunately, all the other workers around just kind of watched in silence. They didn't really do anything. And but slowly people just stopped and they were watching, and the machine stopped working, and all they could hear was the sobbing voice of Anthony Tanaka saying, "I don't want to work. I don't want to work." A guardsman, I guess, overheard this, or heard the machine stop, went in there to investigate what's wrong, and he just walked up to the kid, pulled his sidearm, and shot him. The whole time, the workers did nothing. I'm sorry, that kind of gets to me a little bit.
Yeah, it's not easy. The story of Anthony Tanaka is one of the most outrageously emotional stories that I've ever seen in a video game, and very few people know about it. But those of us who've been to Levski know that, know the story if you got interested in it, which is nuts. So sorry, go ahead.
And I can't wait to see Levski again. And just now that I've really studied up on Anthony, it's just, I got a tear in my eye. Sorry. But it wasn't the end for him. Footage was actually smuggled out of the factory, and it's found its way throughout the empire. And this was bold enough to defy the emperor himself. Anthony Tanaka would be I'm going to read this right from here. Anthony Tanaka became the symbol of that spirit, that humanity's willingness to put up with cruelty of the Messers was coming to an end. It would still take 35 years, but in my opinion, this was the big spark that started that forest fire to take the Messers down. Now that I've done my studying here, I am going to take time on December 3rd. Yes, this is a video game. Yes, this is fiction. But that is telling for stuff that's happened here in the United States, stuff that's happened in other countries around the world. But on December third, I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to remember Anthony Tanaka and the other kids like him, because there's tons and tons of kids just like Anthony Tanaka. So maybe that haven't come to this brutal an end, but that are living in the conditions he is.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you and I are teachers by trade, so we also are probably a little bit more sensitive to stuff like that, where it's like, we know what kids are like when they're that young and they don't really understand, or they're just kids, and you can see people do horrible things to them. So, and many of us, who aren't teachers, who are parents, may also know that you raise a kid, sometimes kids get tired. They're kids, and seeing that kind of brutal execution is kind of rough. I'll add a little bit to this, which something that's interesting is that the guardsman was a code word. These is a special unit of advocacy, personal guard for Lane Campos.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't just some random guard. It was literally the personal guard of Lane Corpos shooting him. It was essentially like the emperor himself was shooting a kid on that factory floor. God. That's one of the reasons why it was a huge deal. And it spread all over the place. And also, which is an interesting fact, is that footage actually caused RSI, probably saved RSI, the company, because the CEO of the time, who was running RSI, pulled away from the Messer regime. Basically said, we're going to go through all of our factories. We're going to ensure that we're not employing kids. We're making sure that everything's going to be above bar to our own moral standards, and that lost them their government contracts with the Messer regime. And when the Messers eventually fell, that movement away is probably what saved them from the massive culling that happened at the end of the Messer era, which kind of collapsed all the major shipping and ship manufacturers and just companies in general who had been working under the Messers.
So who else builds stuff at over at Magnus? He was from what, Newcastle on Berea in the Magnus system.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's currently the home of Drake, but Drake hadn't existed at the time. It was probably, if I remember correctly, I'm going to look at Arabal. Yeah, the Arabal was a company that made munitions, so they're the ones who made guns and missiles. So,
It's eerily reminiscent of like when kids used to work in the coal mines in America. I mean, that's less than 3 generations ago from today, right? I remember growing up, my stepdad, his father, when he was about 7, and this is in Colorado. He's down there in southern Colorado working in the coal mines for like no pay, really. But they have to do that stuff to be able to feed the family, and it's crazy. And that's the invention. Well, not so much. I guess the invention of unions and labor laws and things like that in modern society, kind of pulled children out of the workforce. But it says a lot to what the Messers, especially the later Messers, were about when that stuff still happens under their watch. I mean, you need munitions that bad. You got to employ children 6 to 7 days a week. That's
Well, it was
insane.
I think it even says it a little bit more. Is that I think it more speaks to the fact how corrupt the later Messers were. And that they weren't really doing it because they needed the money or they needed the guns. It's because they wanted to make sure that their friends who owned Arabal, because all of these people were like friends of the Messers. They were all like embedded with them. Like when I said like there was a reaping of companies at the end of the Messer era, I mean like probably 70 to 80% of the companies. This is just my opinion based off of what I've read. Like the majority of human-based industry collapsed at the end of the Messer era because it was so tied to the Messers themselves. Like I don't know if there was guillotines in the Star Citizen universe, but if there was, they were working overtime at the end of the Messer era, just for how bad it was. It was so bad that literally after the Messer era ended in the early 29th century, there was a shortage of shipping companies because they had gotten rid of so many of the companies that made shipping, just basic shipping stuff. that they had run out of ships. So the government had to sell surplus naval vessels as shipping, like Idrises, as like cargo haulers in order to be able to keep up with demands for food and other things across the empire. So like people like Crusader and Nis and Drake, they came in to fill the roles of companies that had been collapsed because of the Mezzer era. So
it's kind of amazing how much propaganda can influence a group, because they're saying, well, why are we making all these munitions and these guns and this and that? And if somebody started questioning where the money was going, they're going, yeah, but the Zion and Van Duel, man, they're coming to get us. So and they would just sell the propaganda with that fear and just cover themselves. It's just,
and this isn't a long time ago either. In Star Citizen's history, in the verse, the average human lifespan is about 130, between 130 and 150. So this is only 4 or 5 generations ago for many humans. Right. This is like my grandfather was there at the end of the Mezzer era kind of thing. Right. If I remember current 150-year-olds may have distant memories of their parents living under the Mezzers. So, this is like an almost living memory for many people in the universe today. So you have things like Xenothreat, who are I would believe that the only reason why they exist is because of the Mezzer propaganda. Like that they're the evidence of like the results of Mezzer propaganda that has kind of gone on forever and ever. So
right.
And this would have been under Ulysses Mezzer.
Right.
Yes.
Because Linton would have been just a kid when this happened. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and I think Linton was way worse than Ulysses.
Oh, yeah. Well, his sister was no fair peach either. So.
That's an entirely thing. So I'll talk about the next one because that's a good segue to talk about Ulysses. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mezzers and leading up to it, because the assassination of Ulysses Mezzer is actually one of the other major catalysts to the fall of the Mezzers and the kind of current new empire that we see, the new UEE that we see today. We're going to start with Gaylor Mezzer, who was insane. It's the best way of putting it. He is the uncle of Ulysses. He ruled from 2715 and was ousted somewhere between 27. He died in 2751, around that time. Now, his big thing was to his big note. If you look him up on like the wikis and stuff like that, it's just that he was the person who was all about meta Baroque style. He believed that building these buildings would help kind of keep people in line with these big, Baroque style buildings as a way of showing power over the people. But he also was a replacement for the previous Mezzer, who was insane. Also, as you notice, they get progressively more crazy. I believe his brother Samuel Mezzer had intentionally allowed the Van Duel to invade, and Gaylor was supposedly the weaker one, so he wasn't able to inherit. But when they literally murdered Sam, when his own guards killed him because he was causing the downfall of the empire, Gaylor was installed as the new Mezzer, even though he had a degenerative bone disease. So he died very young, even for humans at the time, which was 85. And his uncle, or his nephew, who was not very... He was known as a kind of a political wet blanket. He raised taxes, and he was, like his uncle, very obsessed with building structures, but he didn't really have the force of will. He wasn't very well liked, let's put it that way. He thought that he could make the people like him by building breads and circuses, building giant structures, monuments to his own ego. And one of those was called Kano Stadium on Angeli, which is in the Croshaw system. Now, what he didn't know was that him spending like crazy building all of these different structures was bankrupting the UEE, and his son and his daughter, Linton and Fiona, who I believe was 11 or 12 at this time, said, we need to get our father out of office if we want to have any power, because we're not going to have an empire left. We're not going to have any money left, so we can't enjoy our time as imperator. So they started plotting together to try to overthrow their father. Linton was very, very charismatic and had all of the circles. He was the older brother. He had all of the he could get all work into the circles, especially in the military circles, because a lot of people thought he was incompetent. He was spending too much. So Linton was able to convince many military personnel to side with him in a coup. And Fiona managed to, the best way of putting it is, if you've played StarCraft 2, I forget the name of it, but he's the son of Mengsk. I don't remember, forgot his first name. The younger Mengsk, who, in that's spoilers for like a 10-year-old game, but he hires the Raynor who is sworn to kill his father, to try to kill his father and take the reins for himself. It's kind of like, oh, my father is ignoring the major rules, so I'm coming to you because you can get things done, that kind of thing. So Fiona kind of played that role where she was going out and finding people who were upset about the death of Anthony Tanaka and other rebels who had existed against the Mezzers for hundreds of years, maybe in kind of more subtle ways. And she gathered these people together and then got special forces operators and advocacy agents to train them on how to infiltrate the advocacy and the military. She essentially used Green Berets to train the anti-Mezzer rebels. Then on actually coming up, the anniversary is coming up soon, August 12th, 2781, Kano Stadium was going to be opened. So Ulysses was driving past. He actually drove past. We'll talk to this guy in a bit. He drove past a crowd, and in this crowd, standing on his father's shoulders, was a young August Dunlow, who had the day off because his school, his very important private school, had given them the day off to say hello, to wave at the imperator, because you don't get to see it every day. So he was able to see the imperator drive by, and he waved. And what August wouldn't know is that shortly before Ulysses would arrive at the stadium, Fiona's rebels blew it up with the bomb. We're not talking like a small stadium either. This would be like a modern sports arena, kind of like maybe probably even bigger than a modern sports arena. A huge facility just destroyed by these rebels. And at the same time, the members of the military under command of Linton surrounded and ambushed Ulysses' car and opened fire and killed him. Now, as anyone who's ever seen or knows anything history about coups, especially violent, bloody coups, they don't end very cleanly. So, fighting was broken out between various factions of the government. Not everyone was necessarily in the side of Fiona and Linton. So it was this bloody affair that went on for the rest of the day. And unfortunately, in the initial explosion, August Dunlow's mother was killed. And during the fighting, his father was injured, grievously injured. And we know that this is the same kind of empire that Anthony Tanaka was living in. So they were expecting to pay. He had to pay for his father's healthcare. So August Dunlow was forced to go to work to try to make enough money to help his father. And they lived on the streets because their home was destroyed in the fighting. And shortly after, his father eventually passed because he didn't have enough. So here's this young, me look at his actual age, because I think he was like 11. Yeah, he was 11, about the same age as he's the exact same age as Anthony Tanaka. This 11-year-old kid was on the streets alone. And if it wasn't for an organization called Angeli's Angels, who actually brought him in to an orphanage, he would have been stuck on the street, maybe died, maybe turned to crime. You know, the street gangs of Angeli are famous for being orphan gangs or very serious syndicates. So he was brought into this orphanage, and his hatred for the Mezzers and the fact that Linton, who would then take the throne, essentially killed his parents, made it a personal vendetta against the Mezzers, and was trying to rise through the ranks. He managed to get some scholarships and such, and ended up going to school to be a businessman. He made a lot of he was very good at it. He went to college. He got some scholarships for college. He became very active in anti-Mezzer movements, Mezzer political movements, and to the point where, and he was very good at organizing. So to the point where they were going to go to a protest on Terra, and for some reason, I think he was sick, or it was. Let me look at it real quickly so I can see what it was.
I think he was sick.
Yeah. He got like the flu or something like that, and so he wasn't able to get on a ship that was heading to the anti-Mezzer rally, and the ship that he was supposed to be on just surprisingly exploded and killed everyone on board somehow. Oopsie. That was supposed to have one of the major leaders of the Angeli anti-Mezzer movement as part of it. Yeah, that's kind of not so subtle attempt. You know, the Mezzers got less and less subtle in their brutal handling of their of radicals as the years went on. And that had forced him to get shuffled off into Xi'an space. But that event itself isn't a good indication of kind of what happens after the fact. Linton gets installed as Imperator, and during Linton's reign, he bungles everything. Just bungles everything. Anything that could possibly go wrong, he bungled. I don't know if you're going to talk about the Xi'an peace treaty that was signed by the Terran governor or Terran senator, that Linton refused to sign because it would make it so that the Mezzers weren't as responsible for, where, you know, it removes that boogeyman from their closet. So Linton's like, I'm not going to sign that, which then turned more people against him. But on top of that, he was doing the same stupid stuff that his father was, and Fiona was pissed. Now, all of the rebels that Fiona had trained, most of them were rounded up and killed by Linton after the coup, because the rebels thought that they were going to fight Linton, that they were going to take on all of the Mezzers, and that Fiona was this, you know, she was a Mezzer, but she was a pro-democracy. She was going to bring back the people. And so the problem is that when you train people in asymmetrical warfare and how to hide from government, they're going to do that fairly well if you train them well enough. And if you give them the exact codes and ways that, you know, patrols work and that kind of stuff, then they'll avoid those patrols. So many of these radicals who had professional military training disappeared into the ether. And some of them were protected by Lydia, who herself was, or Fiona, I'm sorry, I always call her Lydia for some reason, but Fiona, protected by Fiona, who were trying to build her own little forces to go against her brother. And with that, well, before you did that, you guys want to, any comments or anything else like that about this? Because I know you two were both ex-military, so you probably have a little bit more of a kind of a context for this sort of thing.
Well, first, were you talking about Valerian Minsk?
Yeah,
StarCraft?
Minsk. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I played.
Same here.
Game, so.
I remember. I was surprised I remembered Minsk at the very least. I was like, oh yeah, right, yeah.
So I mean, I think you hit all the highlights there. It's it really, the segue into the next section is about that type of teaching people how to do that stuff. But I see so much inspiration being drawn from different movies and different, sci-fi type of things. Like I see a lot of with Anthony Tanaka, I see a lot of like Hunger Games type stuff,
Mhm.
right? I see a lot of Star Wars in there with essentially an emperor and absolute power. And I guess what's interesting is that they still had a Senate, even though the Senate really didn't have any real power. They still have the Senate, which is very like episode 3 and 4 Star Wars, right? And it's and it's kind of interesting that they're trying to justify their rule of fear. Really, it's fear of the next Tavaran War or the next, the Vandul or the Xi'an or I guess not the Banu, but all those aliens, and we have to be prepared. So they're driving this huge military industrial complex, but on the side, they want to create all these grand architectural buildings and bankrupt the empire while they're doing it. And that's the uniqueness of these measures. And I don't know what it is about, making the building the giant stadium and all this. I don't know what, of course they're crazy, but
yeah.
I guess I'd like to see more of kind of what's driving that architectural gene.
Yeah.
Based
off of what I've been researched, essentially what happened was there, for some reason, Gaylor and Samuel, and going forward, I think Sam's mom as well, the one who was the imperator before him, all for some reason got stuck in their brain that you could rule a country by architecture alone. That like if they built enough really like oppressive architecture that to make people feel small, that they'd be less likely to rebel. Which is why I call them insane, because it's like people don't necessarily don't not rebel because they are afraid of a giant statue in a courtyard. The reason why they rebel, especially in history, is because they can't eat. Because they have nothing left to lose, and you gave it to them. You're the one who caused them to have nothing left to lose, and so they kill you. And so it's like and I think it really does mirror a lot of like the Roman emperors who, like, as the time went on, they became more focused on like the trappings of power rather than actual power. Whereas the early Roman emperors were more focused on, we need to actually secure power. We need to make sure that people are happy, because if people aren't happy, they'll just kill us all and take over. So we need to make sure that, we need to, border our rule based off of power over the people. And with like Ivor Mezer, his daughter, his son, his granddaughter, that all very kind of comes across as like, hey, we understand that our hold on this power is very tenuous. And a genuine belief that they believed that they were doing the right thing for humanity. That if they weren't in charge, then they would have already had a third Tavaran War or a Xi'an War. That like they're the reason why the Xi'an hadn't attacked yet, or the reason why the Tavaran hadn't re-rose. It's debatable, but at least they had some sort of convictions. But like from the fourth Mezer on, it was assassination, and after assassination, coups going on all left, right, and center. It was about power rather than the responsibility. So,
right.
Yeah, I see him pulling again from different inspiration of Roman emperors, from Nero to a little bit of Augustus and Julius Caesar, and the way the whole Senate works, and with an emperor, without an emperor, it's funny how history literally repeats itself, right? Even in lore. I see a lot of Game of Thrones in this stuff too.
This is why I like the lore of Star Citizen, because it's like, there's definitely some Game of Thrones stuff all over this thing.
Yeah.
So,
one thing I noticed in all of this when I was doing the reading on this portion, without the stadium blowing up, without certain things happening, would there be a Crusader? I mean,
Yeah.
this really shaped him, young August, and it shaped his philosophies with his company. It's and just walking around Orison, looking at the splendor, and just feeling, you can actually feel that people are happy to be there. The
Yeah.
employees are happy to be there. You don't have that guy in that one place, what do you want? Just
Yeah.
put that back. And, I haven't found him yet in Orison. But it's some of these things on who are these people working here? And they're just people that are not just dedicated, that know their jobs and they do them well, but they want to give back too. And in Crusader, that's what Crusader's all about. They want to, they want to build the best of the best, period, and have, employees that are living well, but they also want to do what's morally and morally right across the empire. So if they could cut some costs here by doing this, but it would kind of scout this boundary, they go, nope, we're not going to do that. We'll spend more money.
I forgot to mention that August Dunlow, for those of you who are playing Star Citizen 314 right now, or further patches, is the name of the spaceport in Orison, because it's August Dunlow would go on to found Crusader Industries.
Yeah,
he's so like a lot of his, his early days as his being molded by the tragedy of his life, and then going on to fight the Mezzers as a almost personal vendetta, and then trying to rebuild a better humanity and failing to do so with the new government.
Right.
He just said, I'm going to turn to business. I was business. I have a business degree. I'm just going to turn to business. And then he did,
Right.
So,
well, and they funded a huge amount to Angeli's Angels.
Oh, yeah.
And then I was reading about, I don't remember what CEO it was, but I guess the board or something was talking about reducing the amount that they fund and being a little bit more about profit. And then they had to go out on a limb and say, no, this is what August Dunlow wanted to do. These are his ideals. This is the ideals of the company. And it eventually, it stuck. And they're still, to our knowledge, doing that type of philanthropy today.
Yeah, they basically cover their costs. They cover their operating costs, and everything else that's profit, almost like 90% of their profits go to charity.
Right.
So.
Yeah, we can tell Jawa's a little biased towards Crusader.
I mean, they're probably the most moral company in the game. Even more moral than the game that's named after the guy who created the game. So, so, and they make really cool ships. So it's like,
yes, they do.
But speaking of this kind of rolling into this absolute cluster that is Linton's Mezzer's, imperatorship, Fist, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the end of the Mezzer era?
Sure. So we know that Linton, who was Mezzer the 11th, took over from his father Ulysses, and like you said, it was just one blunder after another, just bad decision, and they were just as cruel and oppressive as their predecessors were. And I think it doesn't really say it specifically, but I think Fiona had a lot. They weren't really co-imperators, but she had a lot of sway on the decisions that Linton would have made. And there was a treaty, the Akari Cray, something like that.
Akari Cray, yeah.
Yeah, and it was with the Xi'an and the humans, and so the Senate, one of the senators from Terra, he kind of secretly went over to this neutral. It was across the Perry, somewhere by the Perry line.
Yeah, let me look it up real quickly. But actually, no, I actually did a Galactic Historian piece on it. And I was like, oh right, yeah, that's actually where it got signed.
Yeah, and they basically signed an agreement to. Basically a kind of a loose peace agreement and it was the start of the end of the Cold War with the Xi'an, and people were once it got back, Linton said, "I'm not going to sign this because he has to ratify the treaty," and he refused to ratify. People did not like that at all. It led to more hostility towards the Measure regime. What else happened towards him? Let's talk about Garon II. So Garon II was I don't remember what system it was in, but it was a planet that had an indigenous species that I guess not everybody, but everybody pretty much knew that they were sentient. They had intelligence, and the UEE kind of claimed that planet, and they decided to terraform it, and all in the name of profit, right? You terraform it so you could have a workforce down there, mine it, strip mine it, whatever you're going to do, and it. This should have been hush hush, but it wasn't, and all that information got leaked out, and that specifically the Measures approved the genocide of a sentient species on Garon II, and that really was the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. And there was for lack of a better word, a terrorist group called the Tide. And the Tide is basically what started the revolution of getting the Measures out of there. And just to go back to earlier, when I'm reading the lore, and it goes a little bit back to Hunger Games, because the Hunger Games, it was so oppressive, and there was no communication between a lot of the different districts and stuff. But they had their TV shows that were completely controlled by the government, right? And I believe most of the media in the Measure era was controlled a lot by the government. It had to pass all those checks, and the broadcast was about like the nightly news, and they were talking about the wedding of Val Measure to Celia Carter, and let's talk about their wedding dress and this and that, and then all of a sudden Tide takes over the airwaves, and they say, pull the veil from your eyes and see. And they kind of showed the footage of Garon II, and everybody, because they hacked the spectrum that everybody watched, everybody saw that they terraformed this planet, and they killed everything just to kind of feed the greed. And then almost immediately after that, you had basically 22 days of insurrection, and which it's a really cool post if you guys decide to read that. But it culminated at day 22 with the death of at least Linton Measure. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think he died. I think he was captured. I'm not sure if he died, but he was killed. He killed? Okay,
he was killed when they stormed the palace. Yeah,
that's right. And I don't think they found Fiona, though. Fiona's in the wind, and still to this day, her and maybe her children or anything like that would be in the wind. And they established a new government, which is the government we have today, with the first Imperator after that being Erin Toy. And she came out on a broadcast of the media outlets that were formerly controlled by the Measures and started talking about, we're going to immediately institute term limits for every Imperator, which is 10 years. The Senate is back. It's not just a despotic type of government. And they established new cabinet members like High General, High Secretary, all that stuff is back. And but really, if you start looking back, the Tide was the group that kind of started pushing that, and I have no doubt that they were the ones who actually, those guerrillas that learned how to be guerrillas from the overthrow of Ulysses Measure. They figured out, hey, this is how we do this. And one of the cool ways they did this was they ended up, because obviously the government controls all the comm relays. And the government was wondering, high command is Admiral Kale's like, hey, how do stop all the jump point traffic. How are they still communicating? Because, if you cut off communication, that's first thing in the playbook. If the enemy cannot talk to each other, you have just a huge tactical advantage. But they had learned through being guerrillas to piggyback onto the military signal, and they were able to communicate with that, and they were able to still stay within comms and organize, and boom, everything kind of came down, and ousted the Mezzers out of there. And it's a pretty cool story of how it all went down, and just it's the this part's the end of Star Wars and all that.
The dancing in the streets, throwing the stormtrooper up and down in the crowd, that kind of thing,
yeah. And I can only imagine, where August Dunlow and all these other people that have put so much work and effort into fighting such a oppressive regime, and then the people, I think they were so they just didn't have the knowledge that all this was going on, and when you as a government control the media and really everything about it and what people see, you control the narrative, right? And once people started learning, like, oh wow, this is really, really bad, these guys, it's just kind of interesting, and it makes me wonder if the Romans were the same way and stuff like that. Once people really found out about that, and there's even parts of U.S. history and other world history today where we see things like this, and what was it? Egypt was a very similar revolution like that, and now they're a democratic state. So interesting lore there in the Star Citizen.
The other things that I'm reminded of is the Thundering Thorshoes, which is around the same time, a group being called the Thundering Thorshoes, which is a bomber squadron of retaliators, were sent on a mission to go kill a small group of rebels in a moon. It was supposed to be like a terrorist training camp, is what they were told. So they go into the system, they form up, they start scanning the system for any signals because they don't want to get ambushed, because they figure if this is a terrorist training camp, there's probably fighter squadron or something around there protecting them. So the scanning, nothing. All of the scans they bring up do not seem to be anything about like a terrorist training camp or weapons, munitions. Nothing seemed like that. And as they got closer and closer and closer, their scans, they actually they broke protocol and calmed the base, because there was a base on this moon. They calmed the base and said, surrender, we're about to bomb you. And their reply back is, we're a farming commune. What are you doing? And the commander is just like, yeah, the commander of the squadron, and like most of his starmen were like, this does not look like anything we were told. These are a bunch of civilians on a moon. Like, there's no guns here. Mm-hmm. So they decided they had antimatter torpedoes, which are these incredibly devastating weapons that can destroy planets. And so instead of firing on the moon, they fired it at some asteroids, because they were ordered to fire, because they came back to command, were like, hey, we have bad intel. These are just civilians. I didn't sign up to kill civilians. And the admiral said, you fire those damn torpedoes. So they did. They just didn't fire it at the moon. So when they came back, they were immediately arrested and court-martialed for not following orders, and they were sitting waiting for judgment. They were sitting waiting to like basically get black-bagged or get killed. And while they were waiting for their trial, they were released because the Mezzers had been overthrown. Mm-hmm. So they're still around today. There's still those bomber squadrons around today, but that's like one of those, like, every time in verse, every time they talk about like the like Invictus Week, like the Navy will always bring up the Thundering Thorshoes, because they did the hardest thing in the military to do, which is not follow an order because it was against the law or against the morality, which is the hardest thing for anyone in the military. Anyone who's been in the military probably tell you is y'all probably know. It's like, you gotta. Yep. You don't question orders, and it's hard to question orders, even if it's seeming morally wrong, because you don't want to be the wrong guy, or you don't may not have all the information, sort of thing. So, but yeah, so that kind of illustrates that, like, it wasn't just these rebels. Like, you had Tanaka, you had the whole, like, I'm not going to sign a peace treaty with the Xi'an, even though Xi'an want a peace treaty. You have the military being like, I didn't sign up to kill civilians. You have like everyone in this chain is just like done with the Mezzers, and all it takes is this one event for all of them to go, we're done. This ends today. This ends this month. We're just gonna finish this off because we can't do this anymore. So yeah, it's almost like a collective just release of the tension that had been building up for like 200 years. So.
Right. Well, but just that the people overthrew, and it had to be. I know the lore isn't completely done, but we're talking system by system by system. I mean, we know there was protesters in Croshaw and on Vale, and they were getting shot at. Like 200 people got killed, and I'm sure on Earth and Terra and all these other planets, there, once that news got out, they were just done. It's time to time for a change.
Yeah. This is my personal theory as well. There's a bit of lore that there was a dictator on Idris 4, which I think is Locke, that had a rebellion against them, and they the company Castak Arms. I love Castak Arms. I'm going to do an entire big breakdown of Castak Arms because I love Castak Arms because they're the most immoral, moral company that has ever existed in Star Citizen. They are literally like, they're arms dealers, and they don't care who they sell to, but they're going to do their best to make sure that they sell to both sides, but make sure that everyone knows they sold to the right side.
Yeah. And which side is that? The winning side?
The winning side.
That's who writes the history.
Yep. That's it.
And so one of the things they did was they actually managed to help smuggle weapons to the rebels in Locke, and they were able to overthrow their dictator. And so as a thank you, the new government actually sent a new flag to Castak Arms's, the first run of their new flag was sent to Castak Arms's headquarters as a thank you for their weapons, helping them overthrow their dictatorship. And they actually hang it in their lobby for their headquarters, this flag that of this country they helped build. And my theory is that, as I said, revolutions are messy and they take a long time. They're not instantaneous. Like, I'm sure those 20 days or 30 days was an intense time period. But I don't think that just when Mezzer died that everyone just kind of was like, oh, we're done. I'm sure there were holdouts. And my theory is that Locke 4 was a Mezzer holdout who refused to leave. And the military was so weakened from internal strife and civil war that they couldn't really organize an effort. So what essentially Castak Arms was doing was almost their civil duty in saying, like, hey, we're going to help the pro-government radicals who are trying to overthrow this dictatorship for the UEE. We're going to give them arms. So there's a whole story that we're missing in the lore about, like, the lead up. We know the lead up, but like the context and the aftermath of this revolution. So
I would like to learn a little more about that because Erin Toy, I guess it is Toy, Toi. I mean, she's the one that took over right afterwards. Yeah, and
she was a senator from Terra,
senator for Earth, Sol 3. And she was only in there 10 years, but she passed a lot of initiatives, like the Fair Chance Act. That's a big one. But, we all know why that one was passed, about the sentient beings. That one was passed, but she passed a lot of other things too. And she did all this within 10 years. Did she get pushback? Or did people just follow? That would be kind of interesting to.
Well, I think she had the Senate. She had the Senate back in there, right? So when you pass the Prime Directive, you
so it's Prime Directive,
and I would imagine it would go through the Senate and then to her. Even politicians today, the president will have, their person in Congress introduce a bill. That's their bill, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like Paul was saying, the economy would have collapsed. All but the biggest corporations like an Anvil or an Aegis, or and I know Aegis suffered tremendously because they were so tight.
They were almost collapsed.
Yeah.
And that would have been, that's such a big ship manufacturer.
Well, the only reason why they didn't collapse was because they had for like 300 years had been the only manufacturer for the military. So it would be like today if you took Lockheed and all of the modern aerospace engineers or all of the naval engineering companies and just said, we're going to take all of your engineers and throw them into an inferno. And then said, military, go defend us. Your average, naval, engineer or mechanic would be like, I don't have any fucking parts. Like, where am I going to get these parts? Yeah. The company you just nuked the company that makes these parts, and I got to replace this every 4 hours. Like, how am I going to do this? Yeah. So that's the only thing that saved Aegis was because they were the only ones who made the parts and for the ships that were still being used. And if it wasn't for that, they would have 100% been axed like the other companies had because they were so tight with the measures.
Oh, I've had to deal with getting parts on a carrier in the middle of a war, basically, and it's sometimes it takes a while to get little things.
Yeah, and I've had to try and get parts for equipment you're on an island, so you go find parts is what you got to do.
Yeah, manufacture your own stuff.
So
or scavenge it.
You both know firsthand how hard it is when you actually have parts being manufactured for the things that you have. Imagine being on an island or in an aircraft carrier and just knowing that these parts don't exist anymore. So anything you find is the last of its kind. So that's there's a reason why Aegis didn't get the axe, and that's the big one. So all right. Great discussion. This is a good episode. I'm gonna be the next episode that I'm gonna do. Actually, been planning a little bit as well. We're actually gonna talk a little bit more about the Cold War that led up to this revolution. A little bit more about the context of this kind of stuff. But this is a really interesting event, as it were, in a series of events. To give you some context for those of you who are listening and watching this, for the current state of why is everything so messy in the current UEE? It's it's because for 300 years a bunch of crazy people ran the government, and it took a violent revolution to change that, so that doesn't get cleaned up quickly. All right, well, thank you so much, Fist and Jawa. Make sure you go to fistandjawa.org or twitch.tv/fistandjawa, youtube.com. Just look up Fist and Jawa on YouTube, all those sorts of places. Thank you for coming
check
on.
out the Natural Ones on every other Monday.
Every other Monday. And like I say every time, hope to see you someday in the black. And remember, ex Historia and Astra.